good afternoon. It is Thursday afternoon on the, what is it today? The 8th of December. Oh my goodness, we're crushing down on Christmas. And here I am, going to be talking about some of the crazy stories that I'm seeing in the paper today and yesterday. And so here, the Liberal Party fundraising thing, the pay for play, is being called by the Liberal government an opportunity to form relationships and open dialogues with our government and to network with other wealthy business executives. Well, it's turning out that what happens is that some of these corporations will buy 40 or 50 tickets to go to these fundraisers. So it is not just a $1,500 per person. There's a lot more money going into the fundraising coffers. And but you know, I mean, to call this a networking opportunity, well, let me ask this: where is our networking opportunity? When do we get an opportunity to have our voice heard, or are we just, you know, extra baggage in the car as we travel along? This is the kind of hubristic attitude that we're seeing more and more and more by governments. Another one is, of course, the fiasco now about electoral reform, you know, where there is no time to really discuss all of this. That there's been lip service paid by some town hall meetings across the country, which are very difficult to attend, and now a questionnaire which is about to come out in January, I believe, has been leaked out, and it doesn't even ask what kind of political reform that we want, what kind of electoral system that we want to have in this country. It just goes on and on, doesn't it? But here is some good news. QP sues Wynne ministers over Hydro One sale. And so Kathleen Wynne, Finance Minister Charles Sousa, and former Energy Minister Bob Shirelli being sued for malfeasance. And all I can say is thank goodness. They've only sold 30% of the shares in Ontario Hydro, so this will put a stop, temporarily anyway, until this case is heard. And thank goodness someone has come forward and taken on this action, because this is not the sort of thing that an individual can take on. It needs to be a large body of people with some financial resources, because this is going to be quite a fight, there's no doubt about it. But you know, I mean, this is, have these people forgotten? Have we forgotten? That's the problem, I think, is that we've forgotten that this is our property. It's we bought these hydropower stations, these assets, everything, the roads, every asset you can think of, water treatment plants, they belong to us. We bought them, we paid for them, and the government manages those assets. We didn't give them permission to sell those assets. Wynne has nothing to support the selling of our assets, other than that she wants to pay down debt, which is unpayable anyways, and put it into infrastructure. No, I don't think so. I have, you know, this whole hydro issue for me is insane. There is absolutely no reason at all that Hydro One cannot run as a non-profit institution. We should be getting our hydro at cost, for goodness sake. Even if we have to pay a small subsidy to Hydro One through taxation or what have you, and I mean a small subsidy, to make up for any deficit in infrastructure improvement, this kind of stuff. But I mean, we should be paying about 1 or 2 cents a kilowatt hour for our hydro. So no, this is unconscionable. These people should go to court. I hope they're found guilty of malfeasance, because this was a deliberate And of course, how did the banks get hold of this? So there's three banks, I think I mentioned in a previous video, made something like $26 million setting up this deal. And where did they meet Kathleen Wynne? Oh yeah, pay for play. One of those, I think it was a $700 plate meeting for the banking execs. Very good. This I thought was kind of interesting. This is about legalization of pot, and it says panel to tell Ottawa to monitor legal pot. Advisory Committee's report expected to recommend extensive regime to measure the positive and negative impacts of legalization. So, you know that this is going to go mainstream. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Take a look at this little picture here. There you go. There's a little plant, a seedling, and I haven't actually done a check on this, but I would warrant that I've seen on the front cover of the Globe and Mail pictures of marijuana at least once a week for the last year and a half. Stories, all kinds of stuff. But I'm just going to read you a little part of this because it's interesting now because just what is coming out about pot and the effects of pot. Okay. A federal panel reporting to Ottawa on the next steps towards legalizing marijuana is expected to call for a comprehensive regime to monitor the impacts of bringing the substance out of the shadows and into the mainstream. And that could make Canada the world's first national case study of the dangers and potential benefits of cannabis when the drug becomes legal, as some of the country's leading drug researchers say. Researchers must study the dangers such as impaired driving and more young people using it, says Dan Werb, director of the Toronto-based International Centre for Science in Drug Policy. But he adds, they must also be open to looking for pot's potential public health benefits, such as people substituting cannabis for alcohol or opioids. The one mistake the government could make is focusing strictly on cannabis-related outcomes, Dr. Werb said. Cannabis, by almost every measure, is a safer drug than alcohol, than cocaine, than heroin, than amphetamines, and tobacco. I'm just going to read that again. Cannabis, by almost any measure, is a safer drug than alcohol, than cocaine, than heroin, than amphetamines, and tobacco. Now that really tells you a lot, doesn't it? And he goes on to say, the question for me isn't really about how many people use cannabis after we regulate it. The question is, how many people use other drugs such as alcohol, he said in an interview in Vancouver. So if we see increases in cannabis use, but we see a comparable reduction in alcohol use, to me that is a massive public health success. If we're only focused obsessively on cannabis, we're going to miss the broader picture here. So it really is, the truth is coming out, and I guess, maybe I should state here that my generation, I was born in 53, so my teenage years went through the 70s, and so it was everywhere when I was growing up. I mean, to my generation, pot is what alcohol is to my parents' generation. It's ubiquitous. It was going on everywhere. Everyone was smoking pot. I lived in Amsterdam for 2 years before I came to Canada, and the same thing there. And of course, when we talk about legalizing pot, I've been in Canada 36 years now, and pot was legal in Amsterdam when I left there. It was legal actually when I arrived there 2 years prior to that. So we're talking, 38 years. The experiment has been ongoing in Amsterdam, in Holland in general actually, and also Portugal legalized everything about 15 years ago, all drugs. And amazingly enough, police saw a drop in crime, a drop in hard drug usage, and many other benefits to society, health benefits, because people could grow a couple of plants for themselves if they needed it for health purposes. No, I think this is long overdue. The government is slow to wake up to this, and I don't really think there's going to be any issue. You know, people from Canada, you know, go to Portugal for vacations in the wintertime, and they tell me it is the most beautiful country, almost crime-free. People are friendly and welcoming, and they certainly, I mean, I haven't asked them if they noticed any drug use on the streets, but they certainly didn't say that there was, it looked like there was heavy drug use or beggars or, you know, crime on the streets. So, you know, I can only take that as a positive. But no, I think this is long overdue, and I don't think it's going to make a huge amount of difference at all. I wouldn't worry about it. I wouldn't lose one wink of sleep over that one. RCMP put body-worn camera plan on hold over tech issues. Mounties won't be wearing tiny video cameras, at least for now. The RCMP says it is postponing the deployment of body-worn cameras after testing revealed technical problems, including limited battery life and lack of durability. I think also part of the answer can be seen a little further on in the story, where it says several violent confrontations between police officers and civilians across North America have generated intense controversy and the public debate in recent years. The small video cameras are intended to openly capture an accurate, unbiased and reliable audio and video count of the incidents from the officer's perspective. Well, actually, you know, the officer's perspective is everyone's perspective, because if you have an unbiased account, you know, that camera is the unbiased eye, and so it really can't be just from the officer's side. It's going to be from everybody's point of view, to the benefit of everyone. Although it will be interesting to see when these do become enforceable, you know, how many people, or how many times it turns off that the camera wasn't switched on, or the batteries were dead, or something it didn't capture, or. But they have noted down in California that the number of violent incidences between police and the public had dropped off considerably since the introduction of body cams on police officers whilst on duty. So I think that kind of tells its own tale, doesn't it? So anyway, I'm going to flip over again to the fake news, because this is absolutely extraordinary what is taking place right now, and I'm actually going to insert a couple of videos from one of my favourite alternate media sources, which is Russia Today. There is RT and RT America, and you will see by the quality of reporting of Russia Today, this is a superior news channel, and it is more than willing to objectively ask the questions. And of course, you know, you'll see Paul Craig Roberts will actually say that what the Washington Post has done by this, by posting these 200 odd sites of supposedly fake news sources, is it's given every American an opportunity to go and check out actually what are very good and independent news sources.
Now, the Washington Post is distancing itself from an expert group it used as a source for an article on fake news and so-called Russian propaganda. The paper's responding to widespread criticism that the report it based the article on was flawed and that the group behind it should not be trusted. Well, the initial article, the Washington Post, accused 200 US news sites of being, quote, routine peddlers of Russian propaganda. The list it was referring to was put together by a little-known collective called Prop or Not, which claims to be made up of independent political analysts and computer scientists. An editor's note later appeared above the article pointing out that the paper doesn't vouch for the group.
A number of those sites have objected to being included on Prop or Not's list, and some of the sites, as well as others not on the list, have publicly challenged the group's methodology and conclusions. The Post, which did not name any of the sites, does not itself vouch for the validity of Prop or Not's findings regarding any individual media outlet, nor did the article purport to do so.
When the Washington Post published that article, which effectively allowed a mysterious group called Prop or Not to accuse some 200 alternative news outlets of being, quote unquote, peddlers of Russian propaganda, citing the supposed findings of this group as evidence of, quote unquote, fake news being spread around during the election. When the Washington Post published the article, the U.S. mainstream media ran with that story. It spread like wildfire, effectively smearing outlets as diverse as Drudge Report, Truthdig, Naked Capitalism, Antiwar.com, and the Ron Paul Institute, who found themselves on the list, which to many was reeking of McCarthyism.
The ones who are charging us with listening to what Russia tells us to say, I think they've lost all credibility. People look at that and say, same old stuff again, but they're looking for scapegoats, and they're looking to try to destroy the messenger.
So they comprised a list in an effort to discredit us as Russian agents. The list, what it does, it provides Americans, Europeans, anyone, with objective sources of information that they can turn to. So it's backfired on the people doing this.
When some journalists began to look into this mysterious group and their methodology, they found that simply exhibiting a pattern of beliefs outside the political mainstream was enough to risk finding themselves on that blacklist. When they asked this group, Prop or Not, to explain why popular websites like Drudge Report were on their list, Prop or Not had nothing better to say. Quote, they refer audiences to sort of Russian stuff, end quote. The Washington Post now writes it never vouched for the findings of that group, Prop or Not. It is trying to distance itself from this group, obviously following the backlash. But if you look at their article, it referred to them as independent researchers. It gave them credibility, which in effect validated their smearing of some 200 alternative news outlets. The Washington Post, published this article as this bombshell story to expose fake news, but it appears in this case the Washington Post ended up generating fake news.
Gan Chigan reporting there. Well, it's not only the American media that's been whipped up into a frenzy over Russia's alleged meddling in US politics. In the US, Congress lawmakers want to launch a probe into Moscow's alleged hacks during the US election campaign, while another bill has already been approved, allowing the creation of an interagency committee to combat the Kremlin's, quote, covert efforts to influence people and governments.
So, and I think I should maybe point out here, my political leanings, because you may wonder, I seem to pound Liberals. I pounded Harper and the Conservatives when he was doing his thing. And so I am actually what they call a political atheist. I really don't support any party. I support good government. And the reason for that is because if you have good government, if you have good governance and a rule of law, then of course it doesn't matter who you elect, they are going to be bound within the confines of that law. And as you can see by some of the stories that I'm pointing out, is that there is a complete disconnect that's taken place between the government and who is in charge and who the government is working for. So please don't get me wrong, when you hear me pounding these politicians and the council, of course the municipality, I am merely seeking a level playing field based on common sense and the needs of the community. I mean, if the government is here for any reason, is it not for the benefit of the public? Isn't that what the whole idea was? And, sadly, well, maybe not so sadly, because it's not working very well, but the government is really losing relevance. We're finding now that the government comes to the table so late with information that it's actually history as it's announced. And that's why people are turning to channels like RT, the Max Kaiser report. I urge you to watch Max Kaiser. Go to the Corbett report with James Corbett. This is absolutely brilliant, flawless research. Okay, Dan Dix, Press for Truth. Here's another guy. He was just down at the Dakota Pipeline filming, risking his life to go and interview the people down there and see what was actually going on behind the barriers. So no, I would highly suggest, and if you read my letter, I continue to write letters in the Promoter and the Kawartha Lakes this week. I've listed a few more sites that you can go and visit to get your news from, because the lamestream media have absolutely disgraced themselves. And so when they come forward with what seem like good reporting, and maybe it is good reporting, I'm sure some of this factual stuff is, but it just lacks credibility anymore. You have to question yourself, did they make this up? And you'll see by these two clips that I'm going to insert shortly that there is serious questions about the veracity of the mainstream media.
Western media outlets are still mulling over Russia's alleged role in the US election, with allegations that Moscow was spreading false information in order to influence the outcome. It's part of a larger media craze over the flood of so-called fake news this election season, a term which, according to Google, saw a huge increase in searches. The Washington Post believes Russia was responsible for a lot of it, and in a recent article made reference to a list of some 200 US news sites that are called routine peddlers of that propaganda. The list was put together by a little-known group called Prop or Not, which it claims is composed of independent political analysts. Many journalists were quick to criticise the Washington Post for citing the group.
Washington Post publishes a blacklist of fake news sites while using a key hallmark of fake news: inflammatory accusations from unseen sources.
Washington Post shamefully promotes a McCarthyite blacklist from a new and very shady group.
Good, the definition of Russian misinformation has expanded to any vaguely fringy site that doesn't have enough money to sue me for libel.
I've no idea what this website is, nor who runs it. Not sure how that makes us allies. Looks like just a blog roll.
Author and former American presidential candidate Ron Paul told us that such allegations are just an attempt to make Moscow a scapegoat.
The ones who are charging us with listening to what Russia tells us to say, I think they've lost all credibility. People look at that and say, same old stuff again, especially when they look a little bit deeper in how they did things much worse than they're even pretending or accusing us have done. But they're looking for scapegoats, and they're looking to try to destroy the messenger. The fake news comes from our own government when they tell us about why we have to go to war and do these different things in our economic reports. And that's probably what was the big issue of the campaign. That's probably why Trump did so well, is because they've lost confidence in the government. But I don't think there's any significant downfall of this. I think that it helps us get the story out, because the whole report that they put out in the Post is fake news again.
And the other thing I would like to know is, would somebody define the word fake to me? What is fake? Is this like a little bit off with your facts? Is this lying about inflation figures or GDP figures or jobs numbers? Deliberately issuing numbers that are on the high side and then retracting them about 2 weeks later? Is this about the weapons of mass destruction that all of the papers completely supported? They were right behind us. They were basically telling you that this was the case, and now of course we found out that it's not. Is that fake? Is that a fake story? What about the reporter who said he was in a helicopter and shot down? I forget the guy's name now, but that turned out to be a fake story. So I would like somebody to define fake for me. And so I'm a political atheist. I believe that First Amendment, and of course the first article of the Constitution of Canada, is freedom of speech, and that's why it's number one. That's why it's the first freedom that you are allowed to exercise. And if you shouldn't be allowed to exercise, you just can exercise freedom of speech. I believe that everyone has the right to say whatever they want to say. Of course, you have to suffer the consequences of saying that if you offend somebody, or what's the famous saying? I might not agree with what you have to say, but I will fight to the death to defend your right to say it. And that is the principle that Canada has been founded on. And it's interesting that when you start suppressing language, it goes underground, and then it starts taking on a life of its own. But if you allow freedom of expression to breathe throughout society, then things that are unpalatable just generally go out of fashion. When you think of all the references that we had to coloured people in the past, they've just gone out of circulation because we moved forward. We moved forward, and we stopped using those names that were more connected with the slave era. And you really, certainly in Canada, maybe in some of the southern states, you might hear it more frequently, but certainly in Canada, I don't think I've heard the N-word since I've been here, or really seen a lot of ethnically sensitive language, shall we say. So we've moved on in many ways, and that's how we moved on. It's not by suppressing the language, but allowing the language to evolve, allowing people to learn that not cool. It's not cool to use, and there's no need for it. I don't think maybe when I was a younger man and less wise, I may have used that kind of language, but I certainly find no need to make any of those kind of references, and yet still, make my language expressive and interesting, talking about interesting topics and what have you. But you don't, prejudice should not enter into anything. You don't need it to enhance. It's like swear words. Now, of course, I do swear occasionally, but you don't actually need that in the English language to embellish, or for emphasis, because there are more than enough words, trust me, in the English language to do that. Anyway, I'm going to, these next two videos coming up are from Russia Today. I hope you enjoy them, and please take your time to check out this incredible news source. Thank you very much, and you have a great Thursday afternoon.